Hello, friends. Chris Corsi here, president of Thrive Today, and I want to welcome you to the Relational Skills in Real Life podcast. Today's topic is the importance of emotions. That's right, the importance of emotions, and we're going to have some emotion mythbusters today. So, we're going to talk about whether emotions are good or bad. Why do we need emotions? What are emotions exactly, and what aren't they? You see, there's a lot of myths and a lot of beliefs and a lot of misunderstandings around emotions. And the reality is, if we don't have the skills that we need to manage our emotions, then emotions quickly feel bad. They feel overwhelming. We want to get away from emotions and pain. We don't want to feel our feelings. And there's nothing fun about that. And the younger we are, the fewer the lack of capacity skills that we have and the stronger the emotions in many ways because we just don't have the maturity, the capacity, and the skills to manage big, strong feelings. And there's a few factors that go into how well we can manage emotions. Do we have relational skills to feel, share, and quiet our emotions? Do we have another mind who can enter in and help us while we feel our feelings? And then we share our feelings with this other mind, and they help us feel validated and comforted so that we can calm down. And the lack of attunement often makes emotions harder to manage. Or when we feel alone in our emotions, emotions quickly become intolerable. And friends, there's nothing about feeling alone in our emotions. The reality is, God created us in his image for emotions. You see examples in the Bible where God has emotions. When he sees the wickedness of the people in Noah's day, he relents that he made people, right? Like God has some big feelings. If you read the book of Jeremiah, God pours out his heart to help Israel return to him. And you hear God's pain because his people are just not following him, listening to him, turning to him. Instead, they're going after false gods. And so God has feelings and emotions. And because we're made in his image, we have feelings and emotions. So emotions aren't bad. Emotions are meant to drive us to relationships. Emotions are signals for connection. So when we have emotions, they're supposed to be bridges that build better relationships. But when we don't have what we need to manage what we feel, emotions feel like barriers to relationships. So, what's your opinion about emotions? Do emotions feel like a good thing or a bad thing? Do they feel helpful or unhelpful or unnecessary? Right? We all have opinions around emotions. Some emotions, like joy, can often feel good. And some emotions that are more tolerable, they feel like they're okay. But the emotions we lack the skills to handle, our brain has opinions about that. And we don't like feeling shame, or we don't like feeling despair, or we don't like feeling angry. Whatever that is, the reality is emotions are meant to draw us together with other people. And brain science tells us a lot about how God wired the brain for emotions and connection. We now know that there's an emotional control center in the right hemisphere of the brain. This is an interconnected emotional control center. And one of the things that happens is this is the part of the brain that really runs the show. So as long as I can manage what I feel, this control center works together so that I can still be me, my relational self, and I can still act like the person that God created me to be. But when I can't manage what I feel, the system starts to break down. And the reality is, this is the part of the brain that can take over under high levels of distress. So, what that means is it's not the left hemisphere where I get my words, where we have cognition, where we have what we know as willpower and logic and reason and choices. The emotional control center can actually take over and shut off the part of the brain where we get our words. And this happens when you're so upset, you just don't have the words. Maybe you're so mad and you lose your words, or you're just so hopeless, you don't even have the words to describe what you're feeling. So, part of what we do when we train relational skills is we're equipping the brain's emotional control center to run optimally so that we can stay our relational selves in the good times as well as the bad. So, emotions should drive us to better relationships and improve our relationships and signal that connection is needed. Well, I'm excited about our friend and guest today, Thrive friend Todd, who's going to share about what he's learning about emotions that's much different than what he learned growing up. Let's listen to what Todd has to say.
Growing up, I feel like if the men in my family would see a child crying or just having some other big reaction emotionally, their most common reaction to that would either be to immediately move out of the room or and let someone else deal with that, or there would be some large outburst of anger toward whichever child was making that noise just to get it to stop as quickly as possible. Um, during moments that were loud and full of joy on the opposite end of the spectrum, even this would happen just as frequently. I feel like the impulse of all the men in my family was particularly just make this noise stop, get this to end quickly. That was a very normal experience of my childhood, and I feel like it was burned into my character pretty much as like the default reaction that I often have to just too much feeling. I feel like now that I'm dealing with my own children's big emotions, it's been sad for me to see a lot of times my automatic reactions to them are still consistently to feel overwhelmed and just wanting to shut that down. Consciously, I want them to experience a fullness of joy and peace and the capacity to deal with hard things they face in life and to live the way they were made to live, And but my unconscious and automatic responses so often are in the moment are just again overwhelm and make it stop, just make this all stop. So, as I've continued down this path, and often sometimes you can get to the point of feeling very helpless to change. I see how destructive that is, and I felt prompted by the Lord over the years. Just this can change. I've felt that prompt, and I believe that He actually wants to help and provide something new. As I've been practicing with the skills that I'm learning from Thrive, I have felt really encouraged by just seeing new models for how to navigate emotions and to repair when I make mistakes with my family and others. And I've seen increases now in my own capacity to experience more joy and rest. It's very encouraging. All this has given me more capacity to deal with things that overwhelm me, and I have more hope for what can happen between us and what they might be able to pass on to others in their lives as well. So it's great stuff.
Wow, friends, I really appreciate Todd's transparency on his journey here around emotions. And he shares a lot of very important information as far as what he learned growing up, that emotions were bad, emotions were overwhelming, crying was too much, even joy could be too much energy. And so what happened is Todd learned that emotions are meant to be avoided, pushed away, dismissed, covered up, right? So Todd grew up in an environment where emotions, positive and negative emotions, were just simply overwhelming. And so when we learn that emotions are bad or overwhelming, then we learn to avoid emotions. We learn to shut them down or we learn to run away from them. And it's really neat to hear what God's doing in Todd because he's now learning a new way of living. He's learning that emotions are actually good. And he's learning to recognize his internal response, which is, with his family, when emotions come up, his internal response still might lean toward, I got to shut this down or this is overwhelming. But he's learning a new way as he's practicing relational skills. He's learning to grow joy and he's learning to create an environment where emotions are embraced, where they're felt, shared, and quieted rather than shut down. So it's helpful to think about today that our emotions can be very overwhelming when we don't have what we need. This doesn't make emotions bad. Emotions are signals for connection. And so, what we can learn to do instead of trying to outrun our emotions or shut them out, that's pretty hard work. We're just not meant to carry that load. We can learn to better manage what we feel, to take a breather, to learn how to return to joy and peace from our emotions so that relationships stay intact during times of upset and strain. So we all can have some outdated, unhelpful responses when it comes to emotions, but the good news is, just like our friend Todd, we can learn a new way. Friends, this is why we practice relational skills so that we can grow the capacity to better manage what we feel. We can learn to bounce back and return to joy from our big emotions so that we learn emotions can build better relationships and strengthen bridges so that we can grow our relationships no matter what emotions people are feeling. Friends, this takes some practice, some time, and some interaction. That's why we have some really exciting resources around emotions. We have an emotions webinar that you can watch on our website, thrivetoday.org. If you go to Skill 11, Returning to Joy, on our skills page, you can find some new resources that we're releasing this year. Here at Thrive Today, we're really passionate about equipping God's people with relational skills so that they become the best versions of themselves in times of joy as well as times of strong emotions. Friends, may this be the start of something good for you today.